Africa is a beautiful continent, rich in unfortunate history, beautiful landscape, and home to abundance of the world's resources. This PowerPoint presentation will describe the present-day colonialism effects and natural resource theft that plagues Africans today. Africa is the world's second largest continent, covering over 11 million square miles. That's approximately 43 Saskatchewans. Africa is home to 1.2 billion people, ranging in ethnicities. Africa contains 54 recognized sovereign states, including the islands surrounding it, with an estimated 2,000 different languages spoken within the continent. Amidst these amazing numbers and vast landscapes, we're not here to talk about that. Rather, we are here to discuss the effects that European colonization presently envelops around Africa and how it has corrupted the land and the government. Africa is a key territory on the global map, rich in oil and natural resources. The continent holds a strategic position on the world stage. Africa is the world's fastest growing region for foreign direct investment. It has approximately 30% of the Earth's remaining mineral resources. Sub-Saharan Africa has 6 of the world's 10 fastest growing economies. North Africa has vast oil and natural gas deposits. The Saharan holds the most strategic nuclear ore. Describing the picture I present, it displays the locations of all the available natural resource deposits in Africa. As you can see, every square mile in Africa holds some sort of resource. Africa hosts 90% of the world's cobalt, 90% of its platinum, 50% of its gold, 98% of its chromium, 70% of its tantalite, 64% of its manganese, and 1/3 of the world's uranium. Also, Congo holds 70% of the world's coltan, and more than 30% of the world's diamond reserves. With holding this amount of the world's natural resources, one would think it should be the richest continent in the world. Unfortunately, it has left only the people in charge as some of the richest, while leaving Africans as some of the poorest people in the world. Many of the current problems that arise within Africa comes from the government level. Africans have undergone 2 forms of government liberation, yet remain stuck in the middle of a third one. First is the struggle for independence from the colonial rule, then the liberation from the dictatorships that emerged from independence. Now many African countries are facing a struggle of proper democratic governance. In several countries, incumbent long-serving political leaders have found ways to manipulate the electoral process. Aside from increasing term limits, the methodical undermining of the opposition parties and leaders, along with civil society, is widespread across the nations. Healthcare, security, political stability, and developmental projects are all affected by poor governance. Corruption is endemic to the way of life in much of Africa. It has affected all life's facets, from simple things like access to medical care, schools, and jobs, to the grand scale of it all, like awards of continence in the use of public resources. The effect has seen great inequalities in both access to services from government offices, as well as opportunities for investment, with many local and foreign firms discouraged and forced to close business. Misappropriation of public funds and biased awarding of tenders compromises on the quality of the service available to the members of the public. The whole world may be facing a surge of unemployment, especially among their youth, but in the case for Africa, is more precarious. This is because governments do not sufficiently invest in youth. As the labor force increases, there's a huge disconnect between the older generation and the majority of the policy and decision-making organs and the ever-expanding youth population. From the education to unemployment opportunities and entrepreneurship plans and assistance, the governments face challenges on how best to mitigate for what has been described as a time bomb. This in turn contributes to lower family incomes with many dependents, crimes due to joblessness, and a host of other social issues. The African continent has some of the highest averages for fertility rates and population growth in the world. The statistics alone paint quite a huge scale of challenge now and years to come. While the average world fertility rate is 2.5 children per woman, in Africa, it is double this with 4.5 children per woman. The UN projects that by 2050, the annual growth increase of the continent will be by 42 million every year, and the total population of the continent will have doubled. Africa will contribute 54% of the overall world population growth by 2050. The challenge is meeting the needs of this population explosion. While family planning programs in many parts of the world led to a fall in fertility rates, in Africa this has not happened, and even where gains are made, they are at risk of being reversed. With no effective solutions for family planning and not enough planning by the government to mitigate and plan for the explosions, countries will be thrown into the vicious cycle that comes with the pressure that many people place on limited resources. Insecurity is rampant across Africa. hindering progress at national and regional levels. From the urban crime to terrorist groups like Al-Shabaab and Boko Haram, to civil wars in South Sudan and political instabilities in Libya and Somalia, the examples are unending. The insecurities affect all factors of production, cause massive displacement of people, loss of investment, lives, and scare away direct foreign investment. Weather patterns continue to be a challenge to the continent, which is yet to fully realize its agricultural potential. Prolonged drought periods result in people displacement and deplete grain reserves and loss of livelihoods for a great number of people in the continent, especially along the Horn of Africa. It takes countries steps back in development and the effect of the ability of future generations to battle from a malnourished childhood to better living standards as adults, especially when they become cyclical. It is estimated that 57% of Africa's exports earnings come from hydrocarbons. Proven oil reserves have grown by almost 150%, increasing from 53 billion barrels since 1980 to 130 billion barrels by the end of 2012. The region is home to 5 of the top 30 oil-producing countries in the world, and nearly $2 trillion of investments are expected by 2036. But the revenue from Africa's booming oil sales rarely reaches the people who live there where the oil is produced. This phenomenon is sometimes called the oil curse. Nigeria and other African countries that have discovered oil have done worse economically and politically than those that have not. Some of the world's most state-of-the-art technology exists side by side with little mud and straw villages where they have no running water or electricity or anything. Over the years, people have grown extremely frustrated seeing billions of dollars flowing into the coffers of either oil companies or the national government. In Nigeria's oil-producing city of Port Harcourt, the environmental damage from the oil operations has brought economic ruin for some farmers and fishermen. The people who own the land, who live on the land, and who used to fish in the rivers do not get any benefit out of the oil, and then their life support systems are being destroyed. Corruption is a major factor in the oil curse. In many African countries, billions, literally billions of dollars have just disappeared without any real trace or any real way of following the money. In some parts of Africa, the resentment and anger over the unequal distribution of oil money have led to violence. Countries where the oil production is offshore have largely avoided bloodshed, but in Nigeria's heavily populated Niger Delta, an organized attacks on petroleum workers and facilities have been taking place for years. Groups like MEND say that they are launching the attacks for the benefit of the people of the Delta. An estimated 240,000 barrels of crude oil are spilled in Niger Delta every year, polluting waterways, contaminating crops, and releasing toxic chemicals into the air. With the abundance of resources available in Africa, one can imagine the pollution and devastation of the environment it would cause. Let's look at some of these factors. Deforestation has become one of the major factors, which is affecting the ecological balance of not only Africa, but of the entire world. The clearing of forest cover for wood and agricultural land has resulted in soil erosion, climate change, less rainfall, and many other adverse conditions. Degradation in the quality of soil and loss of fertility has also become a very serious concern. Although the government has taken initiative for growing more plants, the imbalance in nature cannot be covered by just a little effort. Though the countries of the continent do not contribute much to the world air pollution, the increase in population has shown an increase in the air pollution as well. This may be due to the industries, which are set up in parts of countries where labor is easily available. Also, there are many houses where the food is still cooked by burning wood and coal. This too contributes to air pollution. Water pollution is among the top problems. Africa accepts solid waste from the developed countries like America, European countries, and Japan for which they get paid. But these solid wastes are not processed properly and are dumped in the rivers and other water bodies. This results in water pollution. Human waste has also contaminated the water bodies, and access to fresh and clean water has become very difficult. The major source of energy here is wood. 70% of the energy is generated by burning coal and wood, which results in deforestation, soil erosion, air pollution, and ecological imbalance. The government has started awakening people and has made many efforts to get the conditions under control. Electrifying Africa shows that most electricity theft in Africa is carried out not by people too poor to afford electricity, but by people and organizations that consume large amounts of electricity and could pay for it, including government, corporate, industrial, and commercial groups. An alternate energy source will require money, and the continent is not so strong financially, so this may take a while. Africa has many endangered species of flora and fauna, but due to the deforestation and the need of land for agriculture, this is a huge loss of our biodiversity. The uneducated and tribal people are still dependent on hunting. Many of them burn up lands and forests in order to find animals easily. This has led to the death of many other animals too. The illegal wildlife trade is an environmental crime that rips species from their habitat, harms the environment, and endangers the future survival of both wildlife and ecosystems. But it also threatens national security and global economies as well. Oil is one of the major sources of income for these countries, but this has raised many environmental issues, which are very difficult to overcome. The advanced technology used to get oil is very dangerous and hazardous for the environment, but due to the lack of education and lack of proper rules, the extraction of oil is done through the same methods. The transportation of oil through the sea route has also polluted the seawater due to improper packaging and transport. These environmental issues are not only harmful for the African continent, but also for the world's ecological balance. They are contributing to low global warming, which is at an alarming condition right now. Hence, strict measures should be taken by the African government and even the world's environmental organizations to check these issues before it leads to dangerous consequences. We need to find out ways on how to save our environment. It's our planet, and if we cannot save it, then no one else can. Africa has a long, sad history of barbaric and dehumanizing colonial practices. Although we are not focusing on past tense history of continents, you cannot talk about Africa without briefly discussing the past that has led up to the future. Stemming from the 1400s to today, the African countries that are the poorest today are the ones from which the most slaves were taken. All of Africa's colonial masters left behind a way of life completely decimated, a people traumatized and taught in colonial schools to loathe everything about themselves. Their skin, their languages, their dress, their customs, even their gods were replaced. So people seemingly with no past were now free to determine their own future, except in most cases, if not all cases, they weren't. Post-colonial Africa was caught in the middle of the Cold War before ideological dominance, then crippled by structural adjustment policies of the World Bank and INDG, and is now at the mercy of these multinational corporations, whose bank balances, many times the size of many African economies, give them power to act in ways that are above the law. Corruption is one of the biggest facets depriving Africans today. With corruption costing the continent roughly $150 billion a year, none of Africa's problems is beyond the means and resources within the continent. What is largely lacked is a proper policy making and implementation from the political class down to the civil service in these countries. These are the problems that can be solved and mitigated by proper government, which remains the single biggest challenge the continent faces.